The entire international system is coming apart at the seams. Hello, welcome to Dangerous Policy, a channel aimed at intelligent people wanting to discuss important issues facing life and society. My name is Crispin. Today I want to talk about the weakening and fracturing of the global system as a consequence of this pandemic. So we have faced a significant shift, I think, over the past few months. First of all, it has become clear that this disease is not just some wave, right? At first, yes, it created a great deal of anxiety. People were really afraid of what it meant, massive changes to everyday life. But there was, I think, an instinct that it would just kind of wash through the population. And then as long as we, bent the curve so the hospital wasn't wiped out, then we would be okay, and that the disease would move on and sort of vanish into history, and we would get back to our normal lives. But it is showing that this disease is not like that at all. It doesn't care what season it is. It's unclear whether if you've had it before, you might get it again. It's uncertain that, even if you survive it, what kind of permanent effects it has. It's unclear whether or not, a significant portion of the population has or has not had the disease and is therefore immune. A lot of countries that had previously suppressed the disease are now experiencing their next waves. It's extraordinary just how serious this illness is. And not just the disease itself, but the confidence impact it's had on our society. So a lot of countries have closed their economies in order to suppress the disease, finding that they're unable to do so, either they can no longer afford it or the lockdowns aren't working. And therefore, what they're doing is, opening up the economy and allowing the disease to spread. But the fact that the disease is spreading is making people very afraid to go out and invest and have economic activity. So the recessions and depressions are continuing to get worse. And we've just seen figures from the United States that on an annualized basis, 33% of their economy just about collapsed in the second quarter of 2020, 9.5% in real terms. That is way beyond anything we have ever seen in America's history. This is beyond new Great Depression levels. And meanwhile, huge shift in the balance of power globally. As I said previously, this doesn't happen very often. The last time it happened was about 1870 when the US took over from Britain. But this year, China's economy was the only major economy to grow in the second quarter. China is now challenging the United States for preeminence in the world directly, and that is creating a significant set of challenges for us in the West. Very dangerous time in the global order. So a legitimate question is to be asked, are we seeing an unraveling of the global system? There's a lot of things that were already quite fragile about the global order. I mean, the distance between rich and poor is just orders of magnitude beyond what people can really comprehend. I mean, we're hearing COVID. Jeff Bezos increased his personal net worth by $18 billion in one day at a time when 54 million Americans have been out of work. That is just unreal. There's no, I don't care who you are, Democrat, Republican, capitalist, communist, there is no world in which that seems sustainable, let alone just. So we are dealing with a serious global crisis. And this crisis is not just an acute crisis, but an endemic and chronic one. So, are there any other things of history we can draw on? Anything that can give us a sense of wisdom? Well, I do think there's one. Unfortunately, it's not something we know the most about. This has happened before in the Bronze Age collapse. So around 1200 BC, over 3,000 years ago, so we have to stretch into the very distant past, all of the major empires of the world just about collapsed simultaneously within a generation of each other, right? It was extraordinary. You had the Hittite Empire, vast empire stretching across all of Anatolia. It was equal to Egypt. It was a preeminent major regional hegemon. You had Mycenae controlling all of Greece. You had with the myths of Troy, the Agamemnon, like this was a real powerhouse in the Eastern Mediterranean. Ugarit, Canaan, the Babylon, right? These civilizations dominated the ancient world, and it relied heavily on bronze and the trade of bronze. And yet within a generation, all of them, except for Assyria in a greatly weakened state and Egypt in a greatly weakened state, were gone. Interestingly, they did in different ways. All of them seemed to end violently, but some, going by the archaeological evidence, ended because of revolution. So what you would see is a lot of burnt out ash layers of the palaces, of the temples, the courthouses, like things that were instruments of the state. And then some where there was just total devastation. So clearly there had been some kind of external invader who had come and taken over and destroyed and sacked everything. And this happened across the known world, all of Mesopotamia, Aegean Sea, Greece, like these places were gone. The Hittite Empire vanished from the earth. And so what happened? Well, we don't know 100%, but there are things that we do know. So as I said, some civilizations were destroyed through insurrection, so national uprisings, and some were destroyed through foreign invaders. Now, those foreign invaders are known kind of with a silly name, the Sea Peoples, right? It is believed that there was a mass migration of people. So they brought their wives, their children. It wasn't just a bunch of raiders, but people relocating from sort of Western Mediterranean, sort of northwestern Mediterranean, so Sardinia, France, northern Spain, that kind of region, right across to the east. And we do that through genetic testing. We can kind of see that migration taking place all at once. And they became invaders, displacing the original inhabitants. There was also a mass famine. There are some letters from various leaders and rulers to their relatives talking about the spread of hunger, the failure of crops. There was a significant drought that took place around that time. And particularly in sort of the modern day Israel, there was a severe hunger around that time, and a lot of people suffered. There's also a significant amount of seismic activity. There was thought to be a lot of earthquakes and things like that. But also the dependency on tin. Think of the Bronze Age materials of copper and tin, which is what's used to make bronze, as being sort of the oil of the ancient world. Copper was fairly common. You can get it from places that were quite central, so like Cyprus, right in the middle of the Mediterranean world. It was readily accessible in quite high quantities. But tin is rare. You could only get it in Afghanistan, modern day Afghanistan, which is a pretty long way off the beaten path. Or you could get it from Cornwall and Wales in the United Kingdom, and you would sail all the way out of the Mediterranean, all the way out the north coast. Very dangerous, but worth it if you could do it. And in fact, if you're interested in going and see, I think you can go and see some of these Bronze Age mines in Western England. They're quite fascinating. These things were highly dependent on this trade, deeply integrated trade networks, vulnerable to disruption, combined with other forms of malaise, so famine, potentially disease. And then we saw the complete eradication of the global system that went into a new dark age in the region that wasn't recovered until the classical Greek period, hundreds of years later. And many of these groups never recovered their former glory. So the reason I bring that up is because when you have the breakdown of systems, there is often a cascading effect, and it has happened on the global scale before. This was the entire known world at that time, right? So it's not the world as we know it today, but as the people of the time knew it, the people of Egypt, the people of the Hittite Empire, they knew the world as the world of the Bronze Age collapse. And then the eradication of these great civilizations was for them basically the end of the world. Fast forward to 2020, and I don't want to overstate it, but there are some things that seem very harrowingly similar today, right? This global pandemic that has shocked the global trade system. So people have stopped and closed their borders. They're no longer training the free flow of goods. People are much more security conscious about the sorts of products that are produced in other parts of the world. So I don't think we're going to go back to a place where America wants to be dependent on China for its antibiotics and things like that. And a reshaping of power balances, because there's not all countries have dealt with the disease the same way. And not all economies have been dealing with it the same way. And so there does seem to be a massive shift in power balances. There's also a greater disconnect between one's values and what's happening practically. So say here in Australia, we would say that we are a Western country. We believe in American values, the Western values of sovereignty of any individual, human rights, freedom of speech, freedom of association, democratic institutions. And yet, despite our rhetoric about not being more dependent on China, the practical reality is we've become more dependent on China over the past few months than just about ever before, because China's economy is the one that continues to grow, and they're the ones continuing to buy Australian exports. So that's just one example of where these fractious shifts are going, and the fact that we now have I think systemic problems within and between society. So the gap between rich and poor in a lot of these countries is no longer going to be sustainable, and people are going to get their pitchforks out and resist it. But there's just their frustration is going to spill out. It is not acceptable that America's billionaires have 500 billion extra US dollars over the past 2 months, while everybody else is at risk of losing their family home. That is not a sustainable civilization. So within the United States, the hyperpartisanship, the media landscape, the tensions surrounding the US election, there are severe fracturing within that society, which I think it will manage, but I can't be 100% sure of that. You've got China crushing the rights of people in Hong Kong, the Uyghur Muslims in its western provinces still occupying Tibet. So it's becoming more authoritarian, more reliant on coercive force for the CCP to maintain power than it ever has before. The world we are getting in is darker, and the Bronze Age civilizations really, if any one of these things, if it was just a drought, if it was just a foreign invasion, then they would be able to resist that. They would be able to kind of cope. But these things all happening at once stopped the cogs in the wheel. Like the cogs, they just stopped and they started to fall off. The system itself broke down. And in the West, if we have massive disparities between rich and poor, if we have citizens not connected to the state, if we have people afraid of the disease, not willing to invest, if we have collapse in the economic trade system, if we have a reshaping of the power balances of the global economy, and the global military forces, if we have shifting alliances, if we have different outlooks of worldview and the way to cope with these transitions, then of course the global system is likely to unravel. And so we are at an inflection point. There was initially a lot of confidence, I think, that as though this crisis would be acute, it would also be temporary, that we would have a so-called V-shaped recovery. The disease would come, the disease would go, we'd all go back to our lives. Well, that is not what's happening, and it has accelerated and intensified other problems that were already pre-existing. So quite likely, we're going to see massive change to not just like our whether or not we wear a mask, but massive change in the way the world looks, the way countries look, the way political systems look, the way relationships between countries look, power shifts across the world. Like these are all things that are going to create all kinds of tension. We have reached the end of that stage where previously things were all getting better. You have sort of enlightenment now. You had these data scientists saying, look, life expectancy is getting better, disease is getting better, violence is getting reduced. All of those trends are about to dramatically reverse. They already have in some areas, certainly economically, but I think that those things are going to spill out for years and decades to come. So one of the great anxieties we now have is that our children are not going to inherit a world as good as we've had it. That is not going to happen. History is not a story of continuous progress. It's of ups and downs and backwards and forwards. There is no linear progression from, original humans, a lot of devastation, continuous growth. That is definitely not the way things work. We have a lot of creative destruction. Things burn down, things reinvent themselves in their place. So we're going through one of those transitions now. Hopefully it'll be, we will continue to be resilient and manage the issues. We are built for that. In fact, I will read out something I wrote to try and communicate that to people in another video. But right now, I would recommend people go and look up the Bronze Age collapse. There are some good resources on that. I think it's striking how similar that situation was to our current malaise. I don't want to be a doomsayer and say that all, the US and China and the EU are all destined for the ending. I'm not a doomsayer, right? But I am saying we are going through significant changes, and things are going to be worse in the future than they have in the past. That's, this century is going to be much more challenging than the last 40 years of the last century and this century. We are going in a retrograde step to being poorer, sicker, more violent, weaker, less connected with each other, less connected with our states, less connected in our trade relationships between countries. And that's a tragic reality. But I think, but it is part of human life is what I want to say. It's not, it shouldn't be feared, because these things happen. These things have always happened. We went through periods of history that were vastly more destructive than what we're experiencing now. It's just in the context of a single human lifetime and a single human's memory, it is going to be seen very new, very disruptive. So stay strong, stay safe, look out for one another. Try and look on the best things that are green shoots that will come out. It will force us to address significant challenges that we've ignored previously. And that will ultimately make us a stronger, better, more interesting sort of group of people. We are living through extraordinarily interesting times, and so let your curiosity run wild. And thank you for tuning in. If you find value in these conversations and reflections, please like and subscribe. It really helps the channel with the algorithms. And what do you think are going to be the major changes as a result of COVID? Am I overstating it? Am I sounding a little bit nuts, or have we just acknowledged that, hey, things have dramatically shifted? We would never have imagined where we are now 6 months ago. So what is it going to look like 6 months from now? Leave your comments below. I'd be very interested to hear your feedback. And thank you very much, and we'll talk again soon.